Hello and good afternoon. I'm Robert Parker and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar at which you'll hear more about the ICO's new grants programme. You'll be hearing from Deputy Information Commissioner Steve Wood and Senior Policy Officer Lisa O'Brien. They'll be taking you through the programme and including questions. We expect the session to run for around 30 minutes. The slides and the notes from this webinar will be available on our website tomorrow, although there is already a lot of information about the grants programme on the ICO's website. Just put grants programme into the search box and you'll get there. If you're not able to stay with us throughout, a recording of today's webinar will also be available on the ICO's website by close of play tomorrow. So with questions, if you'd like to submit any questions as they occur to you through the presentation, I can then put the most frequently asked to Steve and Lisa. So I'd like to now hand over to Steve.
Thank you very much, Rob, and good afternoon to everybody listening to this webinar today. And I'm very pleased to be able to speak to so many people about the ICO's new grants programme. So this programme is a first for the ICO. We haven't had a grants programme of this nature before, and it's an important initiative of the new Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, aligned to our new Information Rights Strategic Plan, which was published on the ICO website on the 25th of May. In terms of following today's webinar, there is documentation on the ICO website which we published last week, including the applicant's guide for the grants programme, which it will be useful for you to refer to perhaps during this webinar or afterwards in terms of some of the key points we highlight about the programme and the process of applying for a grant. With apologies, so just a slight pause there while I get the slide to move on. Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the purpose of the grants programme. So we've identified a number of key aims for the programme. So firstly, the programme is about supporting and encouraging research. And when we talk about research into data protection and privacy, we're talking about research which is applied research and research which can link to sort of practical outcomes and real solutions for organisations and the public. We're also not talking just about research. We're also talking about solutions and how we can identify ways to increase awareness amongst the UK public and organisations. We're also thinking about how we can actually use the programme to identify solutions of different ways of how to enable improved understanding for individuals and how they will actually understand privacy issues. We're also interested in actually promoting the uptake of research results. So there is some excellent research undertaken by the privacy and data protection community nationally in the UK and internationally, and by the NGO community. But we're keen to see that research results can actually be promoted and actually link more into the real world to stimulate new solutions and ideas to come forward of how to tackle key challenges relating to data protection. And we're also interested in terms of the purpose of the scheme in actually developing a research capacity in a variety of organisations, so in academic, not-for-profit, civil society groups, and to try to really use the grants programme to actually stimulate that community and to help sustain that community to enable them to continue to work on the solutions to these weighty data protection and privacy problems. The next point I want to highlight, as I mentioned earlier, is the ICO's new Information Rights Strategic Plan. So this is an important document for you to consider when you're actually applying for a grant under our programme. So the Information Rights Strategic Plan really is the underpinning and driving document for the grants programme. The Information Rights Strategic Plan actually sets out 5 key strategic goals for the organisation, and you can read more detail in the document which is on the ICO website. For the purposes of today's webinar, we're going to focus on a number of the goals which we think are particularly important to underpinning our grants programme. So the first strategic goal from our plan that I want to highlight is the goal of increasing the public's trust and confidence in how data is used and made available. So there is significant evidence from many surveys and many areas of research of how the public have a low level of trust in how their personal information is used by organisations, including illustrations from the ICO's previous annual track surveys, a piece of research we have undertaken, surveys that we've undertaken with the public over a number of years, and the details of those surveys are on the ICO's website. So in relation to this goal in our Information Rights Strategic Plan, we may be interested in projects which aim to educate the public or organisations on rights and obligations, perhaps focused on tools which will increase the public's awareness of their rights and in some way increase the public's understanding of how their data is used. So particularly focused on the key concept of transparency and how to enable effective transparency in practice. And obviously transparency is a key concept in the forthcoming General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. The next goal I want to talk about, the second goal from our plan, which will underpin the grants programme, is improving standards of information rights practice through clear, inspiring and targeted engagement and influence. So in relation to the grants programme, we're interested in projects which might identify new risks to information rights, perhaps through emerging technologies, and how that actually would need to be followed through to actually offer real and practical solutions, which would actually then be used by the public or by organisations in actually addressing these emerging risks. This flows on to the next goal, which is actually goal 4 in our Information Rights Strategic Plan, which is how the ICO intends to stay relevant, provide excellent public service and keep abreast of evolving technology. So we particularly want projects which will focus on innovative and important technological solutions to challenges such as big data, blockchain or artificial intelligence. Those are examples of emerging technologies that we're actually interested in terms of how solutions can come forward to tackle the data protection risks arising from these particular areas. In terms of the types of technologies we're interested in, we're actually interested in emerging technologies, but technologies where we can actually see there's evidence that these technologies are likely to mainstream in the next few years. So for example, the ICO's interest in big data and artificial intelligence has been set out in the recent report it published earlier in 2017. In terms of blockchain as well now, there's significant evidence emerging how this is actually being used in real life situation by organisations with actual privacy risks, but also opportunities potentially to use blockchain as a privacy enhancing technology as well. So we're interested in technologies where we can actually see that they're actually emerging technologies with perhaps a wide risk to the public. We're also interested in privacy by design and accountability solutions. So we're keen to explore ways of implementing privacy by design or accountability. These are important concepts linked to the new General Data Protection Regulation, which will come into force next May. And organisations will need to demonstrate their compliance with the provisions in the GDPR relating to privacy by design or accountability. So we're interested in examples of projects which could relate to technologies that allow individuals or enable individuals to control the processing of their personal data, or tools that might enable organisations to conduct data protection impact assessments, which is obviously a key tool relating to organisations demonstrating their accountability. The next key point I want to emphasise, and this will be front and centre in terms of the way we consider the grant applications, is we must understand how the projects ultimately link back to a clear benefit to the UK public. The grants programme is an expenditure of ICO funding, and it's very important we can demonstrate how the outcomes from the project can ultimately lead back to this benefit. So we want to understand ways how the outcomes of this project will be able to enable organisations to better comply with data protection or privacy laws and enable individuals to understand their rights, as I've outlined in the previous slides. So it's important that your application will actually outline what steps your project will take to achieve this outcome, even if it's through several stages, as your research or solutions might evolve through different stages, about how they will actually move towards this outcome of actually delivering a clear benefit to the UK public. And you'll be expected to provide regular progress reports throughout the duration of your project linked to this key outcome, and the final report that you will need to submit to the ICO as part of the grants programme will also need to show how you've clearly met this objective. So as we said at the start, the grants programme aims to stimulate research and innovation in the fields of privacy and data protection. And it's imperative that you have this tangible public benefit highlighted in your proposal. We're now going to talk in a bit more detail about how we're actually going to assess the grants applications, and I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Lisa O'Brien, Senior Policy Officer, to talk about this part of the process.
But before you hear from Lisa, I just want to make a point about the questions. Thanks for the questions so far, but I know some of them are going to be actually covered by what Lisa is going to go through now. But please keep the questions coming, and I'll hand over to Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Rob. So you probably want to know now, what is it that we want from you? We are seeking proposals that we'll assess against overall quality. So that would be high quality proposals that demonstrate how your solution would work in practice. We'll also look at relevance and timeliness and make sure that your proposal matches our research themes, it's relevant to current challenges and can be delivered within timescale. We will assess proposals on feasibility so that we can see how you are able to deliver the proposal and that your organisation has the requisite skills, resources and experience to deliver. And does your proposal provide value for money? Your project has been fully costed with a realistic budget forecast. In addition, the proposal overall represents good value for money in order for us to justify allocating public funds. And finally, we will assess your proposal's anticipated outcomes and benefits. So your project would have a clear public benefit in the UK with well-defined outcomes and outputs. If you're able to demonstrate this and have new or novel ideas to provide a real-world solution that's not currently in the marketplace, we would like to hear from you. So moving on to who can actually apply for these grants. When we set up the grants programme, we had in mind applications from civil society groups, trade associations, academia, and any other organisation that can show a clear commitment to public benefit outcomes. And as you can see from the slide, this can include applicants based outside the UK, as we recognise that information rights challenges are often global, and that technological advances over the last 30 years or so have broken down many of the traditional geographical boundaries. And as we said earlier, your project must have clear public benefit in the UK in order to be considered for funding. We've limited eligible applicants to these types of organisations as the ICO has a specific remit set by statute to regulate and to promote good practice under the Data Protection and Freedom of Information Acts. And now we move on to open source. And as we are tasked with promoting good practice, grant recipients must be willing to share project outcomes and results with the public by making these available under the various open source platforms such as the Open Government Licence and Creative Commons. This is a key aspect of the ICO grants programme and one that every grant recipient must be willing to cooperate with. We are also intending to organise an event for grant recipients to showcase project outcomes. All recipients will be expected to cooperate and participate in this. And we'll move on to the practical assistance for tips on completing the application form. Each project must have a lead applicant so that we know which individual is responsible for overseeing the project and that we have a clear point of contact throughout. You can assign more than one individual as lead applicant if, for example, you're making a joint application with another organisation. If you do so, please make sure that you make this clear in your application by highlighting this in your summary proposal and including their details in the list of applicants. We will carry out due diligence checks on grant recipients as part of the fraud risk assessment requirements of the UK Government's minimum grant standards. So you must provide us with all the information requested in section 1 of the application form. If your organisation is based outside of the UK, then you should provide your country's equivalent company registration number or other reference such as university ID. If you don't provide us with that information, that could result in delays to your application. And the proposal summary is really your chance to explain in some detail what your project will cover. This is, unfortunately for yourself, strictly limited to 500 words, so you should ensure that you include key aspects of your proposal so that we have enough information to see what it is that you're aiming to achieve and how you will do this. Normally we expect projects to run for no longer than 12 months from the first grant instalment. However, in exceptional circumstances, such as long-term absence of key project staff, or if your project is of sufficient detail and impact that it will need additional time, we may agree to extend the grant period beyond 12 months. You should make clear in your application the reasons why your project cannot be completed within 12 months, or if anything changes throughout the lifetime of your project, you would need to get our written approval to extend it beyond 12 months. We also require some detail around your methodology, so key milestones to allow us to assess your progress using your interim reports, key deliverables and proposed benefits. And as public benefits are a key criteria for the grants programme, we ask that you set out clearly how your experiences in delivering projects with public benefit outcomes, how your project will achieve this, and details of financial safeguards in place to ensure that the funds allocated are ring-fenced to the project stated in your application. And just a reminder that the closing date for applications is 5 p.m. on 28th of July 2017. Now on to the important stuff. So how much money is available? As we've stated in the applicant's guide, we're looking to fund eligible projects of between £20,000 and £100,000. We may be able to pay funds in local currency to recipients based outside the UK, and we have a total of £1 million available over the lifespan of the grants programme, and there may be occasions where we are able to provide additional funding for projects that have a high yield of public benefit.
Okay, thanks. We'll come in with a few questions before you conclude. I know some people will have missed the very beginning, but just to say this presentation, a recording of this presentation has been made and that will be available on our website by tomorrow. But there is already a lot of information on the website, and there's a lot of questions that have come through this webinar, so thanks for those. And any that we're not able to get to, we will put on the FAQ section of that grants information, which again you can find by going to the ICO website and putting grants programme into the search box and it will take you to all the information, including the FAQs. So just a couple of questions here. If we're a company that already has products, but we want to work on an area that requires additional research, is this a good forum? Steve, Lisa, I don't know who wants to take that.
But certainly it doesn't preclude an applicant who has products already available to apply for a grant under this programme, but you will need to think about how you can actually meet the criteria set out in our application form to make sure that what we're actually funding actually flows through from the funding to a clear public benefit against those aims we've actually set out. So it's important that the funding is actually going to a clear objective. So if you have a product which is already available and you want to enhance that product, you will have to work very hard to show where the money will flow into and what the public benefit is that will flow from that. And you will also need to bear in mind what Lisa has just outlined on the slides as well about open source and the outputs which are connected to the funding as well, being made available under an open government license or a Creative Commons license afterwards.
Thanks, Steve. There's one about consortia. Can consortia make a bid, some kind of joint bid?
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing to exclude collaboration between organisations in submitting bids to us. The same criteria will apply for each applicant, so even if it's a joint applicant, we will be carrying out those due diligence checks on each applicant. So provided that everybody meets that criteria and there's no exclusions that might apply that we've set out in the applicant's guide, there is nothing to prevent consortiums from applying.
Okay, just a bit of a technical one on the form itself. There's a 500-word maximum for the summary, but is there a word limit or a content limit for other elements of the application?
I think we just ask that you use a bit of common sense here, that if we've set a limit of 500 words for the project summary, just be reasonable in perhaps setting out your methodology, that it's not, we have to assess these applications, so try and keep it brief, stick on point, and make sure that you just get your points across, and give us enough information that we can assess your application properly.
Thanks so much. Just there are lots of questions. As I've mentioned before, we will add these to the FAQs, but just jumping to one. Once the research has been undertaken, will the organisation who has completed the research be involved in implementing the solution?
I think that's really up to the organisation applying for the grant to propose how solutions could be implemented. Clearly, some of the funding from the grants programme could be used to focus on implementation as well. But again, leading back to what Lisa said earlier, again about open source, we obviously want the outcomes of the project to be made available in that way, so other organisations can take the outputs and actually try and reuse them and use them in different ways to sort of enhance privacy programs, perhaps in their own organisations, etc. So I think the implementation is something you will need to highlight and explain about how your outputs could be used in your grant application.
Okay, lots of questions here. Should one proposal be aligned to all the goals from the Information Rights Strategic Plan? Steve?
No, you don't need to align them to all the goals, though you're clearly going to need to align them to at least one of the goals, but probably aligning them to a number of the goals may actually sort of enhance your application to show how it is linked to the ICO strategic objectives. So you don't need to meet all the goals, but you obviously need to bear in mind meeting at least one of them.
Okay. Is the fund focused only on adults, or could a proposal focus on children?
I think we've actually mentioned this somewhere in the applicant's guide, that we are very happy to accept proposals that will have an impact on children, or any other vulnerable group for that matter. For example, something that makes online safety a priority for children, or assists families. anything that will provide a real and tangible benefit to the UK public, whether that is a particular group of the UK public, such as children, or whether it refers to adults. I think the key is that there is a public benefit here.
Okay, there's quite a few questions that I know are covered, some of the detailed nuts and bolts issues about how long the programme is and what the amounts of money are. They are all included in the information that you'll find on the website. So I'll just hand back to Lisa now, or Steve, to conclude things.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for listening this afternoon. We're very happy to continue our interaction with people who are interested in the grants programme. Just to remind you all that we have a dedicated email address for the programme, which is icograntsprogramme@ico.org.uk. And we have the dedicated web page, which I expect you've all already seen on the ICO website as well. We're also happy to take individual queries by email as well. We'll also consider all of the questions which have been asked today and try and reflect as many of them as possible in the frequently asked questions section of the website, which I think Robert mentioned earlier. But we're looking forward to receiving the applications, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. But thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve. Thanks very much, Lisa. That concludes today's webinar. And just to repeat, a recording will be available on the website by close of play tomorrow. And just a general advert, news about future ICO websites do go into our monthly e-newsletter, which you can sign up to from the website, and also on Twitter at ICO News. So we'll conclude now. Thank you very much again, and goodbye.